Trump's reciprocal tariffs, smart strategy or risky gamble? After studying global trade patterns for more than 15 years, I've discovered something alarming that most economists won't tell you about America's trade relationships. Something that could fundamentally reshape not just the US economy, but the entire global economic order in the coming months. On April 2nd, President Trump announced what he called the Declaration of American Economic Independence, a sweeping set of reciprocal tariffs that would match or partially match the tariffs other countries allegedly impose on the United States. He also announced a flat 10% tariff on all imports entering the country, regardless of origin. This isn't just another policy announcement. It's potentially the most significant restructuring of global trade in decades. Today, I'm going to break down what these tariffs really mean, who wins, who loses, how they'll affect your wallet, and, most importantly, what you can do to protect yourself and potentially profit from the coming economic shifts. I'll also share some unique perspectives that the mainstream media isn't discussing and propose solutions that could address trade imbalances without triggering a global economic crisis. Before we dive in, take a moment to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming analysis on how specific sectors will respond to these new tariffs. This information could be crucial for your investment decisions in the coming months. Segment 1: Understanding the Reciprocal Tariff Plan. Let's start with what President Trump actually announced. According to the White House, countries like China and the European Union are imposing tariffs of 67% and 39%, respectively, on American goods. In response, Trump plans to implement reciprocal tariffs at roughly half those rates. "We're only going to charge them half of what they're charging us," Trump declared. "I could do the full amount, but that would be very hard on a lot of countries. We don't want to do that." Additionally, Trump announced a blanket 10% tariff on all imports entering the US, effective April 5th, regardless of country of origin. But here's what most commentators are missing. The White House hasn't explained how it calculated these existing tariff rates. The 67% figure for China, for instance, doesn't match conventional measurements of trade barriers. According to the World Trade Organization, China's weighted average tariff on all products is approximately 7.5%, while the US average is around 3.4%. The EU's average is about 5.1%. So where are these much higher numbers coming from? The administration appears to be including non-tariff barriers like regulatory requirements, subsidies, and other trade obstacles in their calculations. While these barriers certainly exist and do impede American exports, quantifying them precisely is notoriously difficult. Former U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer explains, "Traditional tariff calculations only show part of the picture. When you factor in subsidies, regulatory barriers, forced technology transfers, and state-sponsored advantages, the effective trade barriers are substantially higher than official tariff rates." What makes this approach unprecedented is that no previous administration has attempted to quantify and directly counter these combined barriers through reciprocal tariffs. Trump is essentially creating a new framework for measuring trade fairness, one that goes beyond conventional metrics. The key question isn't whether trade imbalances exist, they clearly do, but whether this approach will solve the problem or create new ones. Segment 2: Economic Impact Winners and Losers. Every major economic policy creates winners and losers. Trump's tariffs are no exception. Let's break down who stands to benefit and who might suffer. Potential winners include American manufacturers in protected industries, steel, aluminum, automotive, and electronics manufacturers that compete directly with imports could see reduced competition and higher margins. Workers in manufacturing sectors. If production does return to American shores, blue-collar workers in manufacturing states could benefit from increased job opportunities. The federal treasury. Tariffs are essentially taxes paid by importers, which could generate hundreds of billions in revenue. Trump's 10% universal tariff alone could raise over $300 billion annually based on current import levels. Domestic supply chains. Companies that source materials and components domestically would gain a competitive advantage over those relying on imports. On the losing side, American consumers. Despite Trump's claims that prices will fall, economic research consistently shows that tariffs typically lead to higher consumer prices. A study from Yale University suggests that if Trump increases import taxes by an additional 20%, the average American household would pay approximately $3,400 more annually. Import-dependent businesses, companies that rely on imported components or materials, would face higher costs, potentially forcing layoffs or closures. Export-focused American companies, as trading partners implement retaliatory tariffs, U.S. exporters will face barriers in foreign markets. We've already seen Canada, China, and the EU announce countermeasures. Global financial markets. Following Trump's announcement, S&P 500 futures dropped 1.7% and Nasdaq futures fell nearly 2%, signaling investor concerns about economic disruption. What many analysts miss is the second-order effects of these tariffs. Beyond the immediate price impacts, these policies could accelerate a global trend toward friendshoring, restructuring supply chains to rely more on allies and less on geopolitical rivals. Economic historian Harold James of Princeton University offers this perspective. We're witnessing the fragmentation of the global economy into competing trade blocs, a process that began with Trump's first term, accelerated during the pandemic, and is now entering a new phase with these reciprocal tariffs. This fragmentation could fundamentally alter global trade patterns for decades, creating both risks and opportunities that aren't immediately obvious from traditional economic analysis. Segment 3. Unique Perspective Beyond Economics. Here's where I want to offer a perspective you won't hear in mainstream economic discussions. Trump's tariffs represent something deeper than just economic policy. They signal a fundamental shift in America's relationship with globalization. For decades, American trade policy was guided by what we might call the Washington Consensus, the belief that free trade would benefit everyone through comparative advantage, specialization, and economic efficiency. This consensus was embraced by both Republicans and Democrats, from Reagan to Obama. What Trump recognized, and what helped him win the presidency in 2016, was that many Americans didn't experience globalization as a win-win proposition. For millions of workers in the Rust Belt and other manufacturing regions, free trade meant watching their jobs, communities, and economic security disappear. Geopolitical strategist Peter Zeihan explains, the U.S. essentially offered favorable trade terms to countries worldwide as part of its Cold War strategy. It was willing to accept economically suboptimal arrangements in exchange for geopolitical alliance. Trump is signaling that this era is definitively over. This perspective helps explain why Trump described April 2nd as Liberation Day for America. It's not just about economic policy, it's about recalibrating America's entire approach to the world. But there's a third dimension that's rarely discussed: the environmental impact of global trade. The massive carbon footprint of shipping goods across oceans has always been an externality, a real cost that doesn't show up in market prices. Climate economist Gernot Wagner of Columbia University notes, while tariffs aren't designed as environmental policy, they do have the effect of internalizing some of the environmental costs of global shipping. Producing more goods domestically could potentially reduce carbon emissions from transportation, though this depends entirely on the efficiency of local production methods. This creates unusual political dynamics where Trump's policies might inadvertently advance certain progressive environmental goals while threatening progressive economic priorities, complexities that don't fit neatly into standard political categories. Understanding these deeper currents helps explain why Trump's trade policies resonate with many Americans despite warnings from economists. They address concerns that go beyond GDP and touch on questions of national identity, community stability, and America's role in the world. Segment 4. Global Reactions and Potential Trade War. The international response to Trump's tariff announcements has been swift and decisive. Canada, China, and the European Union have all announced retaliatory measures. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney stated clearly, "We will not put Canadian manufacturers and workers at a disadvantage compared to the US." American companies have recently complained that Canada's, by Canadian, policies already make it difficult to sell products there. China, which already faces significant U.S. tariffs from Trump's first term and the Biden administration, is preparing additional countermeasures. The Chinese Commerce Ministry called the tariffs a violation of WTO principles and promised all necessary measures to resolutely safeguard our legitimate rights and interests. The European Union, which would face tariffs of around 20% under Trump's reciprocal plan, is preparing its own response. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen warned, "The EU stands ready to respond proportionately to any unilateral measures that target our exports unfairly." These reactions raise the specter of a full-blown global trade war, a scenario where countries continually escalate tariffs against each other, reducing global trade and economic growth. Economist Nouriel Roubini, known for predicting the 2008 financial crisis, warns, "The last time we saw this kind of global tariff escalation was in the 1930s with the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, which many economists believe deepened and extended the Great Depression." However, there's an important distinction between today's situation and the 1930s. Modern economies have more sophisticated tools for managing economic disruption, and the global financial system is more robust. This doesn't eliminate the risks, but it does suggest that we're unlikely to see a repeat of the Depression-era collapse. What's more likely is a period of economic realignment, one where global supply chains are reconfigured, some industries grow domestically while others contract, and both businesses and consumers adapt to a new economic landscape. This realignment creates both risks and opportunities for investors, businesses, and workers, which brings us to potential solutions and strategies. Segment 5: Solutions and Strategic Responses. Given these developments, what solutions might address legitimate trade concerns without triggering a global economic crisis? And how can individuals and businesses navigate this changing landscape? First, let's consider policy alternatives that could address trade imbalances more surgically. Targeted rather than universal tariffs. Focusing tariffs on specific sectors where unfair trade practices are documented, rather than applying them universally, could address trade issues while minimizing consumer impact. Scaled implementation. Phasing in tariffs gradually would give businesses and supply chains time to adjust, reducing economic disruption. Negotiated solutions. Using tariffs as leverage to secure specific changes in trading partners' practices, rather than as permanent fixtures, could achieve trade objectives without long-term economic costs. Domestic competitiveness initiatives. Investing in workforce development, infrastructure, and R&D would address America's competitive challenges without the negative effects of tariffs. Former Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers suggests, rather than broad-based tariffs, a more effective approach would combine targeted trade enforcement with domestic investments to boost productivity and competitiveness. For individuals and businesses, strategic responses might include diversifying investments, reducing exposure to sectors highly vulnerable to tariffs while increasing positions in domestic manufacturing, commodities, and other potential beneficiaries. Supply chain reconfiguration. Businesses should audit their supply chains and develop contingency plans for sourcing critical components domestically or from countries less likely to face high tariffs. Hedging currency risk. With trade tensions typically increasing currency volatility, hedging strategies become more important for businesses engaged in international trade. Skill development. Workers should consider developing skills relevant to growing domestic industries, particularly in manufacturing, logistics, and related services. The most resilient strategy combines preparation for potential disruptions with positioning to capitalize on new opportunities. Those who adapt quickly to the new trade landscape will not only survive but potentially thrive amid these changes. Trump's reciprocal tariffs represent a fundamental shift in America's approach to global trade, one that could reshape the economic landscape for years to come. While economists debate the merits of these policies, it's clear that they respond to real concerns about trade imbalances and the uneven impacts of globalization. The key takeaways. Trump's approach goes beyond traditional tariffs to address what his administration sees as the full spectrum of trade barriers facing American exporters. These policies will create both winners and losers in the American economy, with manufacturers potentially benefiting while consumers and import-dependent businesses face challenges. The global response suggests we're entering a new era of international economic relations, one characterized by more protectionism and less integrated global trade. More targeted and gradual approaches might achieve similar objectives with fewer economic disruptions. Individuals and businesses should prepare for these changes by diversifying investments, reconfiguring supply chains, and developing relevant skills. What's your take on these tariffs? Do you think they'll help or hurt the American economy? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this analysis valuable, please hit the like button and share it with others who might benefit. And don't forget to subscribe for our upcoming videos on specific sectors and investments that could be affected by these tariffs. Remember, economic disruption always creates both risks and opportunities. Those who understand the changes and adapt quickly will be best positioned to protect their financial future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.